Gilded Age brought prosperity and industrialization to America. Nevertheless, just as you can't gain something without losing something in return, the age also ushered in economic and political corruption and turmoil. The proliferating monopolistic and adulterated industries undermined the needs of the middle class, arousing intense animosity and a strong need for reform. As a result, along with the ideology of bettering the community environment, the Progressive Era emerged. This was a period of social activism and political reform in the U.S. that blossomed from the 1890s to the 1920s. Government intervention in addressing the problems of the society, however, was minimal because politics and businesses were intertwined, which meant greedy business tycoons could manipulate governmental policies for their own economic interests. Aside from fostering efficiency, promoting moral welfare, and creating economic reform, Progressivists' primary goal was purifying the government by exposing and undercutting unfair treatments and tactics of political machines and bosses. One of the key problems which cropped up as a result of the increased need and efficiency was harsh and hazardous working conditions, which the government tended to avoid addressing, fearing the reactions of the wealthy capitalists involved in the industry, gaining profits. The conditions workers, whether they worked in mines, textile mills, or meat factories, faced were pretty similar. For instance, they all had to face filth and minimal working spaces. Most had to work for 12 to even 24 hours, usually with only 30-minute breaks for lunch. Some even had to work on Sundays. On top of these long, dreadful working hours, they had to put up with unfathomably low wages. For instance, steel workers got paid a mere 14 cents a day and railroad workers were paid 10 cents. In the steel mills, mines, and railroads of the U.S., some 35,000 workers perished each year in factory and mine accidents, making this the highest rate in the industrial world. In fact, in 1911, an atrocious fire in the New York company called the Triangle Shirtwaist Company killed 146 people. Here is a little glimpse of what actually happened. This is a real New York Herald article reporting the fire. The building was a total fire hazard because the owners would lock the doors and windows so that workers would have no way to escape. Unfortunately, as if torturing adults wasn't enough, the factory employers decided to torture children from the ages 4 to 14 to work 18 to 20 hours a day. Of the 20 million industrial workers nationwide in 1900, 1.7 million were children. And they had to put up with such conditions as adult workers as well. And they also had to face many accidents. Some died during the process. Now obviously people were infuriated and fed up with such circumstances, and social reformers emerged to show the ignorant government this inevitable reformation of society. Muckrakers, a group of people who exposed the evils of the work and corrupt business practices, emerged. One of them, by the name of Upton Sinclair, investigated dangerous working conditions and unsanitary procedures in the meatpacking industry in his famous novel called The Jungle. This novel provided the public with vivid imagery of exactly what happened behind the doors of the meat packaging factory. The novel's success led to the issuance of the 1906 Meat Inspection Act and Pure Food and Drug Act, which ensured that all meat and foods be inspected thoroughly before packaging. Although President Roosevelt also read this novel and was shocked and became more interested in reforming working conditions and the ethics of the factory work. Here is a little excerpt illustrating the conditions in the meatpacking industry. The government took no responsibility in enforcing laws to help these workers. Labor unions would protest for work compensation laws because workers who got injured on the job were not paid or excused from work. As a result, Workmen's Compensation Act was passed in 1897, ensuring payments to workers or their families for disability or death suffered on the job. This was the result of many working labor unions who protested. Usually, leaders such as Florence Kelley and Edgar Gardner Murphy were the leaders of the unions who worked hard in protesting such laws. Therefore, child labor reformers also included Florence Kelley and Edgar Gardner Murphy. They also worked diligently to restrict child labor and try to educate children so they can grow and become healthy and productive adults. Through their work, they ultimately led to the Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938, which set the national minimum wage and maximum hour standards for workers in interstate commerce, and prohibited the employment of children under 16. Plus, Murphy went out and founded the Child Labor Committee of Alabama, which also helped cope with children getting out of employment and into schools. Nevertheless, these were not the only issues social reformers exposed and exhorted that the lethargic government start taking action to. Not only did social reformers try to expose these gruesome working conditions, but they also attempted to give women equal rights. Women were always forced to be subservient. They weren't allowed to be educated or work in prestigious positions. They went along with such social injustices until a few brave souls decided to take action in the 19th century. Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton were one of these, who founded the National Women's Suffrage Association in 1869, and their goal was to attain voting rights for women. When the 14th Amendment was passed, Stanton and Anthony believed they won their voting rights. However, in the election of 1872, Anthony got arrested for voting in the state of New York. Here is an excerpt from her court case in November of 1872. Although she was arrested several times again, Susan B. Anthony never stopped fighting for her rights. In 1887, she published the selected paper When Clowns Make Laws for Queens, and in 1895, she published the Women's Bible. She ultimately lived to see a few states granting voting rights to women. By 1896, these states had given their women voting rights, and by 1912, almost the entire East Coast had granted women the right to vote as depicted in this map. To present the injustices towards women to the remaining states, posters like these were displayed throughout the country. Similarly, Alice Paul and Lucy Burns organized the National Women's Party in 1914. This group is famous for picketing in front of the White House after President Wilson's re-election. Their goal was to convince the president to put pressure onto the constitutional suffrage amendment. However, once the United States returned to World War I, things changed. In 1917 of June, the police began arresting women outside the White House. Undaunted by these arrests, women marched to the White House carrying banners like these. After years of fighting, women finally won their voting rights through the 19th Amendment, which was passed on August 26, 1920. Although these reformers were faced with a plethora of hurdles, the progressivists ultimately influenced the government to take some sort of action towards addressing the societal issues that people, especially the working class and women, faced by exposing the inevitable need for change. What truly brought them their success was their determination and passion for achieving their goals, regardless of what aspect of society they went on to reform. Even if all their goals had not been met, they elucidated that government can at least take an active role in bettering the society instead of taking no or minimal action as it did before.